Welcome to this season one recap of the Truth Be Told podcast. I can't believe we've done it. We've got 25 episodes under our belt. It's been an incredible ride throughout this first season. I have learned so much personally and professionally on how to be a better communicator. I hope you did too. We've had people from roles from psychologists to attorneys and authors and interrogators, professors, and a little bit of everybody bringing their unique perspectives to our podcast and to you to help you figure out how to be a better communicator, how to be more effective in your relationships, in your careers, and in your investigations, if that's a role that you have. We hope that this episode maybe helps trigger you to go back and listen to some episodes you may have missed, maybe help remind you of some teaching points or takeaways on how you can be a better communicator and live those through, or even give you an idea to share one of these episodes with your colleagues and maybe help them out along the way. Welcome to the Season 1 recap, and welcome to Truth Be Told. This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. These podcast episodes would not be possible without our sponsors, and I have to highlight our two strongest supporters, of course, Wicklander, Zalowski and Associates, and the International Association of Interviewers. We wouldn't be able to do this without those two supporting organizations. We absolutely wouldn't be able to do this without you, our listeners. If you could do us one last favor, any type of like, comment, follow, subscribe, it helps us create this podcast for a wider audience. It helps us also know and understand, what do you want to listen to? What do you want to hear? What perspectives can we bring you? This podcast is for you, so make sure you can tell us about it. Share with us what you like, what you don't like, and how we can make this more effective use of your time. Let's dig in, though, to what we've learned in Season 1. I've mentioned 25 episodes, and our goal here and our intent with the Truth Be Told podcast was to try to have an underlying theme of effective communication. And we sought out guests that could bring you unique perspectives. And I mentioned earlier, everything from psychologists to practitioners, storytellers, authors, attorneys, law enforcement, former football players, anybody that can talk to us about how to be a better communicator. As I was reviewing everything we've done in this first 25 episodes and really looked at the panel of guests that we have, I'm so thankful and just impressed with the amount of dedication and time that each one of these guests spent to make sure they brought you some of the best content that we could bring to help you in your personal and professional development. As we broke down some of our personal takeaways, I really kind of categorized into three different things I think all of our episodes fit into. The first that we're going to go into is the importance of taking science into practice. So when we talk about communication, a lot of times we assume it's just an art, right? Sometimes some people are really good at storytelling, some people aren't. Some people are really comfortable in front of a microphone and some aren't. Some are good interviewers and some may not be. But it's not just about practice. It's not just about an art. It's about the science behind it. What is effective communication? How can we maybe unintentionally contaminate somebody's memory? Ask bad questions. When we talk about the investigative space, what are some things that investigators might do that lead to false confessions or inaccurate information? We're going to talk a little bit about how our guests brought us information from the academic community and how we can incorporate that into our everyday life. The second category we're going to break into in this episode is really just on leadership and self-development. A lot of our guests have held significant leadership roles, executive roles in their professional careers. And some even in their just personal experiences have shown how the importance of self-development and self-awareness has made them a better person overall. And the third category we're gonna end with today in our episode is how to be a better storyteller and just an overall better communicator. So we're going to take the science, so we're going to take the importance of self-awareness and leadership and really end with how can we put this all into practice and become better at storytelling and better at communicating. One of the things I've really enjoyed about what our guests have brought to us in the first season is every episode has not been aimed at one type of profession. I know we've got a lot of investigators that listen to our call just based off of kind of the nature of the business that we're in. But if you have a difficult conversation with a spouse, significant other, kids, coworkers, parents, family member, friends, it all relates to the same kind of underlying theme, right? How do we have difficult conversations, disruptive conversations, but maintain a positive element of rapport And how do we get to that kind of outcome of obtaining more reliable information and keeping that relationship productive? And that's really what our takeaway is how to make all of your communication and your kind of uncomfortable discussions more productive, so everybody feels like it's a win at the end of the day. But let's talk about some of our specific clips, and enough about me and more about our guests. Our first guest we brought on to the Truth Be Told podcast, obviously a personal friend of mine and a mentor of mine, and somebody that, if it weren't for him, probably wouldn't be in the position I'm in right now. And that was with one of the co-founders of Wicklander Zalowski and Associates, Dave Zalowski. Dave joined us on our first episode kind of as our guinea pig, but also to lay the foundation of what does non-confrontational interviewing look like? What's the importance of rapport? And how can effective communication help us get more information? And Dave told us a lot of stories. One that you'll have to go back and listen to. He talked about one of the reasons he left his law enforcement career is after somebody threw up on his shoes, but that's for that episode, not for this one. But one of the most important takeaways, and I think one of the most simple things we learned all season, is how one question can really lead us to the most amount of information. So let's listen to Dave in this clip where he explains the importance of asking, tell me more about that. It allows you to ask the most simple interview question ever, which is, tell me more about that. And you can just continue to expand on whatever story they gave with really little pressure on you as the interviewer.
One of the most powerful questions you ask, tell me more about that. So you're not giving them a starting point. You're letting them choose where they're going to begin. And that may tell you they've avoided a key spot here that we need to go back to.
As we continue our journey into understanding the power of bringing science into practice, one guest that I think just has maybe the most fun and innovative way of educating others on investigative interviewing techniques, communication, and in this specific clip, the importance of science into practice, is Bruce Pitt Payne. Bruce came to us from north of the border, a former RCMP officer, really an incredible person and somebody that's out there teaching and consulting on investigative interviewing. There's a lot of writing on trauma-informed interviewing and really just effective interviewing strategies. But in this clip, Bruce somehow, in only the way Bruce can, talks to us about the importance of science into practice and somehow relates that to him getting hit by a semi-truck walking across the highway blindfolded. But let's hear it from Bruce directly.
Yeah, I mean, the strongest message I always have is follow the science. Yes, there is always room for anecdotal evidence, but remember that is very limited. You might see those things happen, but it doesn't mean that it is a best practice. It's no different than I could put a blindfold on, walk across the busiest highway in Canada and not get hit, but it's just a fluke. Okay, it just might happen that once. But if I do it 30 times, I might get flattened by a semi. So it doesn't make it a best practice just because you've seen it work in your favor a few times.
As we continue to dive more into the science of communication, and really specific to the science of interviewing, we had the benefit of bringing on Dr. Haley Cleary out of Virginia Commonwealth University, a developmental psychologist, to talk to us about how the science of developmental stages, the cognitive abilities of youth, the vulnerabilities or increased suggestibility of youth may put them at risk during, whether it's an investigative interview or just a disciplinary conversation by maybe a school teacher or a school administrator. Dr. Cleary brought a lot of information to us on the science behind how developmental stages may work, but more importantly to our listeners, I think, is how we can be better communicators or more aware of the fact that when we're talking to somebody of a youthful age, it's a lot easier, which is a negative thing, a lot easier to contaminate somebody's memory, to provide maybe suggestive answers, and maybe contaminate the information they're going to give us because of high suggestibility. In this clip, Haley brings to us this concept of power differential, and how as an adult interviewing, when I use the word interview, again, this could be with a teacher with a student, a parent with a child, but how that power differential can cause an imbalance in the conversation and maybe result in inaccurate information.
And so we have to remember the power differential between any authority figure, even if it's a school resource officer or a teacher or a principal, and a young person, a student, a young employee, a person who's suspected of a crime. Youth have many strengths. They're incredibly resilient, but they're also vulnerable in those contexts because of their development.
Now, nobody said that science can't also be fun. When we brought a lot of professors and psychologists and others onto our podcast and we're talking about science, it doesn't necessarily mean we're pouring chemicals into beakers and creating some kind of crazy explosion. For the most part, we're talking about social sciences. And one episode in particular, we talked to Dr. Jeff Kukuka at Towson University, and Jeff shared with us the power of cognitive biases and how sometimes kind of our bias may lead us to wrong conclusions, misclassifications, and how even in investigative spaces that people may have a bias on forensic evidence. A juror may have a bias based off of what an expert witness said. But to have a little bit of fun with this, Jeff and I got into a conversation about how if you're going to buy a bottle of wine, cigars, steak, does the price of the steak, the wine, the cigar impact how good it may taste? Is it just what the number looks like on the price tag, or maybe the name or the design on the bottle of the wine? And in this conversation, Jeff and I talked a lot about how biases might have a huge impact on the criminal justice system. But in this clip, we talk a little bit more on the fun side on how biases may make you look like a better host at your next house party.
If I give you a glass of wine and I tell you, hey Dave, this, Wine Spectator said this is the best wine of 2024. It got a 97 rating, whatever. I spent $60 on this bottle. You're gonna love it, right? It might be $3 wine from Trader Joe's, but you're gonna love it because you think that it's gonna taste good. That's kind of the common thread here. Is beliefs and expectations are really powerful. Right, our beliefs can really distort how we perceive things, whether it's taste, smell, particularly vision. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as our brain tells us it is.
So hypothetically, if I bought a couple bottles of wine and I was having people over, having dinner or whatever, and I told these people, this is new. I've never seen this before. Top shelf. These are really expensive bottles, but they're $9.99 like on sale on the bottom shelf. But if I tell them that, do you think they're going to like the wine better?
Absolutely. Oh, totally. Those are some of the most fun research studies for me. Is just like showing cute little phenomena like that. It's been done with wine. It's been done with beef jerky. It's been done with all sorts of stuff. Where your expectations about the quality of the product. I mean, that's there's a whole psychology to marketing too, right? Yeah. I mean, we want people to think that our product works, and if people think our product works, then it's going to work for them. It's kind of like a placebo effect almost.
We had another unique take on the power of science when it comes to communication. Is we had Dr. Emily Joseph join us. Dr. Joseph has had really kind of an interesting career and academic background. And we talked a lot about her research and passion on interrogations and false confessions, but also more recently, her experience working with Microsoft Xbox in the user experience area, which is really focused on how do you ask better questions to get accurate information. So if you're going to send somebody maybe a customer service survey, how do those questions potentially impact or persuade the way that you may respond, right? Like how likely are you to recommend the Truth Be Told podcast to your friends, 1 through 5? What does that question mean, and how does that actually impact how people might answer it? In this clip, Emily and I are talking about how the way we even phrase a question or the words we put into a question could actually impact somebody's memory. We're going to talk here in this clip about some research done by Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, really one of the experts, the leading experts on memory and the contamination of memory. The takeaway from this episode to me was not only on how can we ask better questions, but it was more so on being aware of these little implicit suggestions that we're making when we ask questions that might contaminate somebody else's response, right? If you happen to be in a workplace doing a workplace investigation, or even at home doing a home investigation between your two kids who got into a fight or an argument, if you happen to ask a witness, right, hey, how hard did you see Dave hit that guy in the face? When you said how hard did he hit him, you're suggesting that it was a hit and that hit was hard. And maybe it was a push, maybe it was a shove, maybe they didn't feel like it was that violent in the first place. But based off the way you asked the question, it might actually contaminate somebody's memory. That's what I learned in this episode, but let's hear it directly from Dr. Joseph herself. You're sitting at the red light and you saw these two cars do something, right? Which is what we'll talk about. These two cars collide, contact, crash, hit each other, whatever it might be. And I ask you a question like, well, how fast was that car going when it hit the other car? How fast were those cars going when they crashed into each other? Give me some more information about what is wrong with that question, or what issues could arise from a question like that.
Exactly as you said, the words that you choose matter both for people's response to your question as well as then how they in the future remember that. So Liz Loftus has done some great research on this, and going back to the 70s actually, and asked that exact same question: how fast were the cars going when they smashed, collided, bumped, hit, or contacted each other? And depending on the word that was inserted into that sentence, we got varying speeds. So smashed was the highest, contacted was the lowest, right? So if you want to kind of get to the truth of the matter, you might not even want to ask how fast, because that's assuming that speed was involved.
As I mentioned in this category, one of the things I really learned is not just how the science is fascinating, right? But not everybody's going to sit there and read research studies and look at statistics and run an ANOVA query and all these kind of crazy things that may be above many of our pay grades when it comes to research. It's more importantly to me, how do we take research and put it into everyday practice? And one of our guests really did a great job of not only explaining that, but living that life. Mark Fallon was formerly with NCIS and a counter-terrorism expert. Mark is also an author. I've got a couple of his books here in front of me if you happen to be watching. One of my favorite books that Mark is his author is titled Unjustifiable Means, where Mark talked about, says the inside story of how the CIA, Pentagon, and the U.S. government conspired to torture. Mark highlights in this book his experience with, and put in quotes, enhanced interrogation techniques, but on how when we look at the science of interviewing, the science of communication, how improper interview or interrogation techniques can lead to false confessions, lead to coerced confessions, and ultimately lead to putting our nation and our security at a higher risk by getting false information. Mark went on, and he's co-authored and edited several books, but one of the most recent ones we talked about in this episode, and I do recommend this for anybody interested in this field, but it's titled Interrogation and Torture. Subtitle is Integrating Efficacy with Law and Morality. And Mark got assembled together just an incredible cast of professionals to put their insights together on the evolution of interviewing and how science has impacted that. In this specific clip, though, Mark's just got an incredible career history and credibility, working on the investigation of the USS Cole bombing and other several counterterrorism interrogations and investigations. But in this clip, Mark talked about really the underlying foundation to success of an interview is rapport and respect. Whether it's with a potential terror suspect, it's a cashier taking money out of the register, or it's talking to your kid about doing something they shouldn't have done. Showing respect and developing genuine rapport is really the keys to success. But let's hear that directly from Mark Fallon, one of our guests. Experience at Guantanamo and the USS Cole bombing and the investigations of people who, obviously from the outside looking in, might be pretty difficult to talk to. You're saying that rapport is just as important in those cases.
Rapport is essential in those cases. The debriefing I did once of an emir of a Jamaat Islamiyah, which is affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Southeast Asia, training camp, who helped instruct bombings. His name was Nasser Abbas. I was trying to look at what his counterinterrogation strategies may be. And he said, I thought I'd be tortured, and I wasn't. And I was treated with respect post kind of USS Cole or post 9/11 when I was conducting investigations of the suspects in those matters, was that when you go in, if they do have some type of counter-resistance training, and you go in there and you are respectful to them, that dislodges those expectations. And if you dislodge those expectations, they may look at you differently.
probably one of the most popular topics that we talked about when it comes to bringing science into practice is the reliance that people have, or maybe the myth that people believe on using physical behavior to detect deception. I would say about half of our episodes, we covered this in some capacity, in which a lot of people think, and based off of what we learned from TV and maybe our gut feeling, is that if you're talking to somebody and they look to the left and look to the right, that must mean that they're lying, or they're fidgety with their hands, or they cross their arms, or maybe they start to turn red in the face, that they must be lying, right? I mean, the old adage is that somebody's nose must grow when they're not telling us the truth. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. We've had a lot of guests, specifically the ones that are bringing science into practice, talk to us about how inaccurate body language might actually be. And the research actually shows us that our ability to detect deception is actually about 50% accurate, right? Which means we could basically flip a quarter and determine if somebody's lying to us with the same degree of accuracy as examining somebody's facial expressions. One of our episodes that I think really dove into this topic is with a guest, Ann Geiser. Ann is another interview and interrogation expert, really overall communication expert. Came to us on a remote recording from the Netherlands as we talked about a lot of different things with national security, training agents for different federal agencies on how to be better communicators, better spies, essentially. And in this specific clip, Ann and I are talking about how sometimes when we're evaluating somebody's behavior, it's a lot more about what our behavior is, what our biases are, or what we may have done to change somebody's behavior in that conversation. I thought it was a really powerful lesson because there's so many times where maybe you're talking to somebody and you think, hey, they must be lying to me, right? They're crossing their arms, they're not looking at me, and they're avoiding me. But maybe it's because of something that you said. Maybe they're offended about something you said 20 minutes ago. Maybe they're nervous to share something else with you. Maybe they're upset or nervous because what they want to tell you might upset you or might upset somebody else that you know. And so Ann does a great job here of talking about how our behavior might actually impact their behavior. You could be talking to your significant other and you think they're lying, but it's because they had a bad day at work.
Exactly.
Or, right? They're mad at you for something else. So I think that's really important, is to have some more context to what we're looking at, observing, and also how we as the interviewer are impacting that person's behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And I always say half of the information that you observe is actually about you. So that's something I train people in as well, to really understand that. If I start to frown, for instance, and squint because I'm really trying to understand what someone else is saying to me, he might find me very critical. So what might happen because of that? He shuts down because she's critical, she's highly alert, I should not say anything else. So once you understand that that is going on, also, if you see someone acting based on your nonverbal impact, you can understand also what you can do to get rid of those kinds of noises.
Although all of our episodes in some way incorporate science into practice, the second section I really wanted to kind of hone in on is this concept of just leadership and self-development. We've had a lot of guests talk about kind of their own personal development and their own personal career growth. We've had a few guests that I thought did a really good job specifically addressing how to just be a better person, a better leader, how to have more energy at work in what you do. And one of the first ones, and one of my favorite, was Dr. Abby Morano. Dr. Abby has written a couple of books. One of the most recent I have here with me, Work in Progress. And you see all my tabs in it from reading and preparing for our episode. This book is fantastic, and just as the title describes, Work in Progress, it's really focused on how we are always a work in progress, right? We're never complete. And we talk about everything from having imposter syndrome to being better communicators about ourselves, being more self-aware, and understanding that things like failure, guilt, and shame are things that come along with success. And owning your own shame is really powerful and impactful and foundational in self-development. Dr. Abby shared with us some of her own kind of personal experiences in doing that and becoming more aware of herself, self-reflecting, and using ownership of her own shame or guilt or even accomplishments on how to become more self-aware and become a better person, a better leader, a better person in relationships, and a better communicator. In this episode specifically, she's going to talk to us about the importance of understanding and owning our own shame. Let's listen to Dr. Abby.
A lot of the time we're running from ourselves. We've been through things or we've done things, and the reality of our own behavior or our own thinking is too much for us. We don't like that reality, so we run from it. We don't face it, we don't want to self-reflect, and if we consider that all of our behavior that we engage in, we make a decision as to, is this the kind of person that I want to present myself as? If you're not engaging in self-reflection because you're hiding from yourself, how can you align your behavior with the kind of person that you want to be? Because you don't really know who you are.
Going back to one of our earlier episodes, another incredible guest, and was really humbled that she spent the time to join with us, is retired Chief Kristen Zeman of the Aurora Police Department. I say retired, which also isn't fair, because Chief Zeman is officially retired from the police department, but seems to just always be working. The chief actually came out to one of our conferences, Elite Training Days, recently, and shared some of her experiences dealing with a mass shooting in front of our live audience, and shared what she learned from a leadership role, from an effective communicator role during crisis. In our conversation, we actually referred to a lot of the stories that Kristen, Chief Zeman, wrote in her latest book, Reimagining Blue, which I have here in front of me if you happen to be watching. Another book, highly recommend. It's written in such an easy to read way because you're almost living alongside Chief Zeman here and her life experiences and her stories. So many good moments on this episode as the chief brought us through things that happened when she was in charge of the police department. Everything from dealing with COVID and having law enforcement can't really be remote workers, but how she managed through that kind of the pandemic and the communication through that pandemic. The chief also talked to us about leading through civil unrest and what happened kind of post George Floyd in the law enforcement community and how to handle that type of sensitive situation when you're in such a hostile environment, sometimes police community relationships. But the chief took ownership of that and really did a great job of being vulnerable with her own community and figuring out how can we be better for you, and really illustrates that on the podcast. But talking about leadership and self-development, the chief also spent a good amount of time in her book and also on our episode talking about mental health awareness, and not just with first responders and law enforcement, with leaders and everybody in general. And one of the most, I think, emotional clips and inspiring clips we had from our entire season came from this episode with Chief Zeman. And I'll let her explain it here, but she really underscores the importance of this biggest life lesson that she said she had on what does it take to be a leader and what does mental health really mean in the first responder world.
It wasn't until our mass shooting that I got the biggest lesson of my life. And that lesson was from an officer who was 2 days after the shooting. We were at a prayer vigil and I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, I saw you at the shooting the other day." And I said, "Are you okay?" And he's in full uniform and the place is packed and officers are everywhere and our city and beyond is there. And he looked at me and he nodded his head and he said, "Yeah, I'm fine." So I asked again, I locked eyes with him and I asked again and I said, "Are you okay?" And he fell into my arms sobbing in front of everyone. And it was in that moment that I recognized two things. Number one, leadership is overglorified. It's that follower, it's that person that didn't have formal leadership that actually was the leader in that moment. By him breaking down, he showed everyone how strong and courageous he was, right? And other officers follow suit. And it was that moment that I understood, one, that we were going to be okay, and two, that everything I had thought about showing emotion and not asking for help was all wrong. And so what a lesson for me. And he taught me that.
On a bit of a lighter note, but still talking about the importance of kind of self-awareness, mental health, resiliency, character. I was really lucky enough. One of the most excited I've been to prepare and record a podcast was with former NFL player, NFL veteran, Don Beebe. Don Beebe played for the Buffalo Bills, my team, of course, won a Super Bowl with the Green Bay Packers. is gone and is now a coach, college football coach, and doing incredible in that second phase of his career. Don has also written. I got one of his books in front of me, Six Rings. There it goes, Six Rings from Nowhere, that you can see. And he's also currently out there working to give people more advice and more insight on whether it's from parenting, coaching, and taking kind of his experiences and his faith and using that to help to promote these kind of same feelings of hope and triumph and resiliency to others. In our episode, we had some fun because we talked about, of course, our collective Buffalo Bills. And in the early 90s, for those of you that are not big football fans, but the Buffalo Bills went to 4 straight Super Bowls, lost 4 straight Super Bowls. And part of our conversation on this episode was, it's a game and it's fun, but this is the livelihood of these players, and they feel like they're supporting a whole community, and especially for Buffalo, right, a whole region that is just dedicated and live and die by the success or failure of this team. And so I got a chance to talk to Don about what is that like? What's that like in a locker room when you've worked for something for so hard and dedicate every day to get to a certain point, and then you fail that objective? Not just once and twice and 3 times, but 4 times. How do you maintain positivity? How do you keep that drive going forward, right? How do you wake up the next day, go to the gym and say, let's just do this again. Let's just run it back. Really, really difficult from, the outside to kind of understand what that might feel like. And Don Beebe is just, to me, one of the most inspirational people, and so excited to talk to him about these experiences. And I left that conversation, that episode, ready to go play for the Bills. I don't think they'll have me, but I left ready to go, run out of that tunnel at halftime and go win the Bourbon Bowl with them. But in this specific clip, Don's going to talk to us about the importance of resiliency and teamwork. And even though you may not achieve that goal, whatever it may be, for you, it may not be the Super Bowl, right? It might be that promotion, that raise, that relationship, whatever it might be. But even if you don't achieve it, it doesn't mean you stop working. And Don does a great job of explaining what that was like in the Buffalo Bills locker room.
Well, I remember what my attitude was, and certainly a lot of those guys, and that's why we kept going back, was, we would lose, fly back the next day, and I went right to the weight room. I wanted to go again. I couldn't wait to get to take that, seize that moment again. I never looked at it as, I don't ever want to go back. I can't believe we can't get this thing done. And I don't remember ever the attitude of the Buffalo Bills that way. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because it does. You got to be able to understand people's perspective and opinions are great and fine, but it's their opinion. Your identity can't be in that, because if it is, you're going to come up empty almost every time. And it's going to be a roller coaster, emotional ride. I just want to be steady, just steady, constantly going up, maybe take a little dip, but keep going up. Okay. I want to train my guys that way when I'm coaching them. It's a long season. It's a grind. We love the grind. Love it. Okay. And honestly, winning is much funner than losing. It really is. But understand this, there's 32 NFL teams, there's 242 Division III teams. Guess what? At the end of the year, there's going to be 31 losers and 241 losers, right? If you look at it from the world's perspective. No, the Buffalo Bills aren't losers. Heck no. One of the winningest programs in NFL history, especially during that stretch. And how many's been to 4 again? I'm sorry. That's right. Nobody. All right. So when you're the only one to do something, that's pretty special. Right. And that was a special group we had together, no doubt.
About halfway through season 1, we had the opportunity to have David Lund join us as one of our guests. David Lund was former VP of Loss Prevention for Dick's Sporting Goods. He's now the executive director of the International Association of Interviewers and a member of our team, and I couldn't be more lucky and happy to have him as a colleague. David is one of these people that is just, his inspiration, his motivation, his positivity is contagious. And I think you'll feel that if you haven't listened to this episode. It's exciting to hear people even talk about David that have worked with him or for him on how much he really cares and mentored in their success. And that came across, I think, really clearly on the episode. And we spent a lot of time on that show just talking about career development, whatever that career might be. But what does it take to be a leader? And what are leaders looking for when they're looking for people of high potential or developmental potential? And every guest, for those of you that have listened to season 1, has had the chance at the end of an episode to kind of leave us with their closing thoughts, or as we call them, their one last truth. And that's the clip I picked for this highlight because it's one that I think went one of the most viral that we had this last season is some of the closing words that David provided us. And it really relates to no matter what you're trying to be better at in life, whether you're trying to be a better person in your relationship, at your job, or even as he mentions it, a pickleball player. What's that kind of key to success to keep yourself above your peers and your colleagues and keep striving for that next goal in your life? And it really comes down to giving it energy. But let's hear it best from David Lund himself.
So I don't think it's a secret, but I would say it's a truth. And again, not newsflash, but your success or failure with just about anything you do is going to be determined by the effort and energy that you give it. I love to say I'm a student of the game, whatever that game might be. It could be something as specific as investigative interviewing. It could be leadership practices and principles. It could be pickleball strategies. I don't know, anything. But being a student requires you to realize that you don't know everything. You might know things that aren't relevant anymore also. So being a continuous learner and being curious and inquisitive will make you better, but always give it energy.
Third main category of where I felt like our episodes really kind of zeroed in this first season was just overall on how to be a better storyteller, how to be a better communicator in general. And we took advice and perspectives from so many different types of people, which was just so cool for me personally, as I learned every episode how to be better, or at least identified what I'm not so good at, what I need to work on. And this first clip that I wanted to refer us to is from a recent episode with Brad Beeler. Brad had recently retired from the U.S. Secret Service, and he shared some really incredible stories if you have not had a chance to listen to his episode. But he talked about stories on protecting political appointees and some government officials and people from other countries, and what the communication looks like when you are guarding a protectee. What's that look like from the federal government to local government or local police? He talked about the importance of staying in shape, and even told some fun stories about running with former presidents or governors. And I'll let you listen to the fun way that he shares those experiences. But when it comes to communication and storytelling, in this clip, Brad's going to talk to us about his experience of even executing arrest or search warrants, and how in that time in his life and in that capacity that investigators and agents would even look at what time of day makes the most sense. What are we taking into consideration? We're going to have these kind of uncomfortable conversations with people. And Brad does a good job on this clip. This is not just about executing a warrant and what's the best time to do that. This could be about, is now a good time I should approach my boss about requesting vacation in a few weeks? Is now a good time to ask my significant other about that golf trip I want to go on next weekend? And it's trying to figure out what is the appropriate timing of a conversation and what factors we should consider to see when somebody is in the most maybe comfortable or relatable stage to minimize that resistance and have a productive, genuine, transparent conversation. Let's listen to Brad's take on that.
One of the Internet Crimes Task Forces I worked with, they would do their search warrants at 0600. Another would do their search warrants at typically 1800, so 6 p.m. And what I saw from those two different were drastic levels of effect, in that the ones that did it at 0600, everybody's home, the kids, the wife, it's a fight or flight reaction because there's somebody breaking into my home, okay? And you just need to do it. Cops, that you have to do your job. But when the search warrants were done in the afternoon or the early evening, the people had chance to ingest food. They were typically in a better headspace. It was easier to potentially separate them from their kids and things, because privacy is one of the utmost things when it comes to communication, especially when it comes to child sexual abuse material and those types of cases, is that the male does not want to obviously talk in front of their wife or in front of their kids. And if I do that case at 0600, it's going to be hard to get around that. The kids haven't gone to school yet. So sometimes you can decide, hey, the best time for this is right after lunch because they've just eaten, they're not going to be hangry. That might be the best time to have that conversation with your boss about getting a raise, versus at 8:30 in the morning when they just spent an hour and a half in Chicago traffic and they're just wanting to get their email set, and now you're coming in bothering them, or right before they walk out the door. So timing is very, very important in conversation.
Early in the season, we recorded a 2-part episode with Jemana Kidd. Jemana is just one of my favorite people. She's one of the most humble, genuine, just kind people, and was nice enough to give us time to record 2 episodes with her earlier in season 1. Jemana's got an interesting story. Part of one of her episodes is we talked about her experience as a victim of a crazy financial scam, and really just a professional con artist that Jemana had hired as a professional assistant, who ended up just taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from her and draining her kid's college fund, and just kind of a crazy experience. And she talks to us not only about her lessons learned from that experience, but also on the communication that she had with bank investigators and law enforcement, how they could be better communicators with victims of financial crime. But the clip I want to refer to now is actually in the first part of our 2-part episode with Jemana, where we talked more about her career experience. Jemana had a career in television and did everything from hosting as a panel on NBA TV and being a part of interviewing celebrities and recapping games and talking about kind of the positive side and stories of sports. Jemana also worked for Extra and had the chance to interview celebrities on the red carpet. And it's really interesting to talk to her about, how do you approach somebody who maybe wants nothing to do with you at the time, knows that everything's going to be recorded and that clip can go viral, and maybe that interview can only last 30 seconds, right? How do you get that out? And you probably have some pressure from the producer, the director in the background telling you what it is that you want to get out of that conversation. So let's listen to one of these clips from Jemana, and I encourage you to go back and watch both episodes and really learn about her life experience. But this clip highlights, again, the importance of how can I be a better communicator, just to allow somebody to tell their story in a comfortable, kind of non-threatening way.
We're in our room, and next to us is Access Hollywood. It was Billy Bush, I'll never forget.
Okay.
And her PR person comes in and she says, okay, we're going to only ask about the movie. We're going to ask about this. We're going to stay away from this topic. We're going to stay, I think it was like her dad, and again, I was raised in a home where you respect people. In my ears, my producer saying, okay, so we're going to start off, we're going to ask her about about the movie, we're going to ask this and that, and then we're going to end it, we're going to ask about her father. And I'm thinking, did you not just hear, how do you do, it's really difficult for me to do that. It's difficult for me to violate people's privacy or to just be pushy or to, just have no couth. So I, again, was just kind of like, I got this, watch. This interview's gonna be so amazing. They're not even gonna care. And I'm like, I asked everything about the movie, but then I kind of freelance, asked her about her personal life, asked her how it feels like being a mom now, doing her own stunts, and she just opened up, and she actually got up and gave me a hug after the interview and said, this has been one of the most fun interviews. So I'm feeling good as she walks out, and my producer's cussing me out.
Since we're talking about storytelling, we have to talk about one of our guests, Lauren Brill. Lauren joined us, and I'll give this part first if you haven't listened to the episode, but Lauren's story kind of began with her being vulnerable enough to share her own story of a traumatic experience. And without taking that away from Lauren and letting her explain it herself on the episode, but Lauren shares how that experience of having this kind of maybe shame or guilt or embarrassment or anger from what happened to her, when she was able to share that story, actually empowered other people to do the same. And Lauren talks about this kind of inspirational process about turning your secret into your superpower. And she went on, and I've got one of the books that she's compiled. Again, Lauren Brill. This one is Unseal Your Superpowers: Letters to Inspire the Hero Within You. And really just a collection of stories, like I just mentioned, where Lauren has created an organization and books like this that allow people who have experienced all sorts of different trauma, from sexual assault to maybe a sudden loss of a loved one, and be able to explain what they were feeling and what happened to them, and in doing so, allow the ability to tell their story to become their superpower or their strength. Really inspirational episode. And Lauren talked to us about how do you give people the platform, the comfort to share such a vulnerable thing. And that's really difficult to do because, right, every person, whether a victim, a witness, or just a personal experience, has their own reasons or resistance to sharing that story. And we all experience that every day, right? Again, this could be a family member, a coworker that they've gone through something, but they're not quite yet ready to share it. Lauren talks to us about her own experience with that. But to me, more importantly, is how she has opened the door for other people to share their stories. In this specific clip, really cool takeaway. Lauren talks to us about maybe how sometimes we have filters on and we're only looking at things from our own lens, and how we can really learn about people's experiences, but we shouldn't have an opinion on that experience until we talk to somebody who's experienced it. And in this clip, Lauren explains that a lot better than I just did. So let's listen to her.
But like, unless you really talk to someone and listen to them and ask them, like, how do we make this better? The person going through something like this, because you don't walk through the world and that their shoes. You don't know what it's like to be a female rape victim and feel vulnerable all the time because you're like a big, strong guy. But like, if I said, hey, you know what, Dave, if you could just walk me to my car, that would be so helpful. You'd be like, sure. But you wouldn't necessarily know that would be so helpful unless I tell you. Just listening to people and what they need and what their situation exposes them to, or how it affects them, and then then making a decision on how to help is really beneficial. I think the only way you can help people is to really listen to what they need. So I think that's really important, and to grow as a society, to learn by the people who are actually affected by it.
In this same spirit of creating a platform for other people to tell us a story, I'm going to highlight another one of our guests, Gil Zamora, who was a police sketch artist out on the West Coast, and now the founder of Mindful Interviewing, and he's written this book I've got here in front of me, the Mindful Interview Method, Retrieving Cognitive Evidence. Gil really has incredible insight and experience on asking people questions when his intent or his objective is to be able to produce a sketch or a drawing based on that person's memory. And there's just what we've learned so far, even if you've just listened to this episode, there's so many things that can go wrong, right? If you're trying to ask somebody to describe maybe a suspect that robbed a store, and you ask them a question like, that person happen to have any facial hair? Even asking that question might suggest to the witness that, hey, if you're the cop, if you're the sketch artist, maybe you know who the person is. And by asking me if they have facial hair, you probably think they have facial hair. So now let me think about it for a second. Yeah, they probably did have facial hair. And simple leading questions or statements or even a nod of the head by a sketch artist to make it seem like I'm affirming what you just said was right can contaminate somebody's memory. And if we think about the ripple effect of that, if having a witness provide a bad identification leads investigators down a completely wrong path, which could A, lead to maybe the interview, interrogation, or even conviction of the wrong person, and B, means the real person who should be identified is still out there perpetrating more crime. And so Gil brings to us a really important and several important lessons on how to be better interviewers or communicators, with recognizing that it's really easy to impact somebody's memory and contaminate that. But kind of relative to this concept of storytelling and effective communication, in this clip, Gil is going to talk to us about how he had to be aware of who he was interviewing, more than likely was a victim or a witness to a really maybe horrific crime or experience. So being aware how their emotions might also come into play during that questioning.
Everything from the way they're talking, from the way they're holding themselves seated or not. Are they fidgeting? Are they concerned? Are they getting emotional? Most of the cases that I've done are only felony crimes of violent crimes, sexual assault. So if you can imagine, there's a lot of emotion going on in those interviews. So I have to be very empathetic about what I'm asking, how I'm asking, and more importantly, what they may have gone through in order to kind of reveal this information to me.
One of the most emotional episodes, I think, for me and for a lot of others that we've heard from, a lot of our listeners, was that with Jean Bishop. Jean Bishop is really just an incredible person overall, an attorney, an author, great storyteller, victims advocate. And Jean Bishop has written a couple books, one of which we highlighted on our episode is titled Grace from the Rubble, which I have here. In this episode, Jean talked about first her own traumatic experience. And at a younger age, losing her sister, brother-in-law, their unborn child to a home invasion and just a terrible crime, and how that kind of opened the door and inspired Jean to be aware of what is it like to be a victim and the family member of a victim. What does it look like from a victim's perspective about seeking, punishment or revenge on the person who committed such a terrible crime? And in that same spirit, and in this book we highlighted, is Jean Bishop had the chance to meet two really interesting people. Bud Welch, who is the father of Julie Welch, and Julie was one of the victims that we lost in the Oklahoma City bombing. And she also had a chance to meet and interact with Bill McVeigh, the father of Timothy McVeigh, who was responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing. And really just an incredible episode, an incredible book that I recommend. But Jean talks to us as it relates to storytelling and communication on how can you talk to somebody who suffered such just unimaginable loss, and you can't say, hey, I understand what you're going through, because you don't. But how do you approach somebody in that kind of vulnerable state, allow them to share their story, try to show empathy without also maybe diminishing or trying to put yourself in their shoes? And Jean's going to do a lot better job of explaining that in this clip, but I recommend listening to that full episode and reading the book. It's just really interesting perspective. At the conclusion of the book and the story, she's able to get Bud Welch, the father of one of the victims, and Bill McVeigh, the father of Timothy McVeigh, to actually meet. And just really powerful moment, and the power of empathy and understanding really comes to light. But let's listen to Jean in this one clip that we highlighted from season 1. So how is that interaction like when you're trying to talk with somebody else, another victim or a family member of a victim, and you're trying to say, I've been there, or I understand what you're going through, but maybe you don't understand what they're going through? I don't know if that makes sense, but is there a magic way you found to try to find that connection?
No, you're absolutely right. I never say I know what you're going through, because, like, for instance, I'm the mom of 2 sons. I honestly can't tell you how I'd feel if somebody took the life of one of my sons, one of my children. I don't know if I could even go on breathing if that happened.
Right.
And the thing is that you don't know. You can never put yourself in the shoes of another person. Everybody's pain is very particular. I mean, one of the people I write about in my first book is a woman whose daughter, Susie, at the age of 7, was abducted, raped and murdered and dismembered and dumped into the river by a pedophile. And when she spoke about forgiving this man and praying for his good, I just remember shaking my head and thinking, you are beyond anything I could attain. I could never forgive someone the way you have, and yet look at me, here I am all these years later, and I have.
To wrap up our highlight clips, I couldn't pick a favorite guest. I'm sure that would offend the other 24 others. But how can you not just fall in love with Canine Luna, right? One of the dogs that joined us in season 1. Canine Luna is a therapy dog at the University of Central Florida. And she joined our episode along with Detective Bianca Becker, who another incredible person, but shared with us really the power of rapport, empathy, how the campus police, how they're using therapy dogs and allowing and supporting victims and witnesses to be more comfortable as they're sharing information with investigators, and even people that just need a little bit of dog therapy in their life, maybe even first responders, and how that's helped them kind of in their mental health and mental awareness. And this clip is to me one of the most simple but powerful takeaways we had all season. And again, this is one of the closing thoughts that Detective Becker left us with. So I'll let her put it as eloquently as she did. But the underlying theme here is, even though somebody may have experienced something terrible and we couldn't have maybe prevented it and we can't change what happened, what can we do now? And I'll let Detective Becker explain it as well as she did.
Sexual assault is the number one most underreported crime. But I heard this one time and it really stuck with me. I can't control what happened to you, but I can control your experience moving forward. And I think a lot of times with law enforcement, with how we used to be trained, I think we've done a much better job recently of, that trauma-informed interviewing, building empathy, that rapport building and stuff. That used to be unheard of. It used to be show up and just the facts, just tell me what happened. And so I think we've done a really good job of changing that, but just keeping in mind that this is the most underreported crime because of how victims used to be treated versus now, and there's still that stigma. And so every time I go into an interview, I try to think back on that. I can't change what happened to you, but I can change your experience moving forward. And so anything that we can do, whether it's something as easy as getting them water or a granola bar, whatever that is, having a soft interview room. If you have a dog, that's great, but not everywhere has that. But whatever we can do to help our victims feel comfortable and support them coming forward and talking to us, just do it, because something might happen to them again, or you're not going to get the full story if they don't feel that support. So doing anything that we can to go above and beyond and just support them, it's just such a game changer. So I definitely encourage everyone to think about it that way, of how can we help them.
It's been just an incredible season. If you're still listening to us and you've heard so far in this episode, I don't have enough time, or maybe you don't have enough time for me to go through every single episode that we had. And I just want to highlight a few that I know a lot of our followers really enjoyed and wanted to kind of talk more about. But we've had several other guests we didn't even highlight so far on season 1 recap. We had Amy Rizek, who is not just a sales coach and professional, but just really foundational and effective communication. One of the simple takeaways I had from our conversation was to stop using the word just in my emails. But challenge you to go back and listen to Amy's conversation with us. We'll make you just a more efficient, a more credible communicator, more impactful. We also had Lisa Mitchell, a good friend of the organization, a certified forensic interviewer. On our episode with Lisa, she covered several things, but one of the big takeaways that people had from that episode were just top ways to overcome your fears of public speaking. So I recommend going back and listening to Lisa's. We also had a good friend of ours, Mike Reddington. Got his book in front of me as well. Mike talked about this book, The Disciplined Listening Method, and really on how effective communication and proactive strategies can help us be better with disruptive or sometimes otherwise difficult conversations. We had McKenna Elizabeth join us, who talked about really the difficult job that sales professionals have with cold calling, trying to develop rapport with somebody that you have no idea who they are, leveraging AI in some of those interactions, and really how to differentiate from kind of a static cold call and rapport that's just reading a script versus being a real, genuine person. McKenna did a great job of that on her episode. And of course, we had Anna Papalia, who really has gone viral for all sense of the word on all social media channels, focusing on this. And here's her book, Interviewology. Anna talked to us about how to be a better interviewee when we're looking for jobs, how to be a better interviewer. And in some of the clips that really went crazy from that episode were simple takeaways on how to answer some of the most difficult interview questions. What are your strengths and weaknesses? And Anna does a good job of not telling you exactly what to say, but maybe what to process and what the goal is of the interviewer when they're asking those questions. So a great one to go back and listen to, especially if you're in that job search kind of timing or phase of your career. We also had Liz Pohl with Chicago Police Department come on and talk about the importance of mental health in law enforcement. Really highlighted the risk of suicide with law enforcement and first responders. And we talked in our final episode, we capped off the season with Tom Meehan on the use of artificial intelligence. Some really neat takeaways, some stuff I immediately started to use after that episode, but also awareness of the risks of artificial intelligence. I've just learned so much along the way in season 1, as you could tell just in this recap episode. We got so much that we covered. Even going back and finding some of these clips, I reinforced some of the things that I may have forgotten that I want to go back and focus on for my own professional and personal development. I know I become, hopefully, a more effective leader and communicator and just all around more self-aware. Thank you to the guests that joined us and helped inform me. And I hope all of you listening were informed, even a percentage of what I gained from this. Hopefully it was valuable use of your time. I'm going to ask you one more time to help us out. The more that you can help share our episodes, like, comment, give us feedback so we can make sure that this show is better for you. That's why we're doing it. I'm having a great time, having a blast. We've got so many incredible guests coming on season 2 that I really cannot wait to reveal who we have for our first episode dropping on January 8th, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in for season 1. Stay tuned. Don't forget to follow us, and we can't wait to see you on season 2. Thanks for watching Truth Be Told. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And to keep this conversation going, follow the Truth Be Told podcast on LinkedIn and Truth Be Told CFI on Twitter. On behalf of the International Association of Interviewers, Rick Landers-Zalowski, and our valued sponsors, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.